I can't tell you how awful it is for a police officer to be walking down the street or having lunch somewhere and they hear a parent or a grandma say, "Hey, see the police over there? If you don't eat your whatever, he's going to come get you." Or if you don't obey grandma, they're going to come get you. That's a negative message to that kid. And I would always take that opportunity to go down, kneel down, get on their plane at their level and say, "Your grandma's only joking. She doesn't mean that." I can't remember a time when I didn't take the opportunity to do that after one of those kinds of alerts. If we're using the police as a threat to our own kids, that's a horrible message.
Mm.
And if cops don't realize that and they miss the opportunities to make those one-on-one connections, that's the start, right?
Yeah.
That's the opportunity. And we should take more advantage of that.
This is the Bounce Back Generation podcast. I'm Jennifer Dillon. We're talking today about a need we all have. It's something our brain was built to be aware of, and in so many ways our behavior is shaped by it. It's the need to feel safe and protected. Our guest, Jim Dudley, is someone who took a pledge to protect us. Jim is a former deputy chief of police for the San Francisco Police Department and is now a professor of criminology at San Francisco State University. Suffice it to say that our feelings about policing may vary. Do police keep us safe or make us feel unsafe? It's a question for our times, and I wanted to speak with Jim because he's given a lot of thought to these issues as a former cop and a professor. I urge you to listen also to his podcast called Policing Matters, where he delves into questions about policing and the community. Did you know that stress, like the stress of the pandemic, stresses around our finances, worries we have for our children, our health, safety, our political fears, all of these elements can affect our ability to think and problem solve? They affect our emotional states and our long-term physical health. This is a fundamental neuroscientific principle about how stress and trauma impact us. And feeling protected is a primary driver of our behavior. That's why we say protection is the first building block to build resilience. In this interview, just a gentle trigger warning, we will be talking about the subject of suicide towards the last 15 minutes or so. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I really want to talk to you about protection because I think you have some great insights into what it means to be not only personally protected, but how do you protect other people? What does protection look like for you?
Growing up, one of 7 children and mostly single mom, most of my life, my mom was single, raising all these kids in San Francisco on the poor end of the scale. Safety and protection really meant a lot to me, just like I know it means a lot to a lot of kids growing up in difficult situations. And I know over the years, through looking towards the future, I really wanted to have a better life for myself. And that meant safety and protection by staying in school, by doing as best I could, by working. I can't remember a time when I had anything less than 2 or 3 jobs juggling it at the same time. And I think preparation and looking ahead and seeing what you need to do to protect yourself first before you can prepare to protect others. And that came when I got married and had 2 boys and wanted them to be safe. I think once you're in a situation where you feel safe by having enough food and water and shelter, then you can expand out and think about security in the future. Growing up for me, police, law enforcement were a figure that I could look up to. There were a couple of scrapes I had growing up in the mission where I was fortunate to have a great interaction with police. I guess about midway through high school, I thought about being a police officer myself. And I applied and I was walking the plank. I didn't know anyone in policing. I didn't know what policing was really about, except for maybe a class I took in high school. And it's a career. It's a great career. I never looked back. I started from scratch at the police academy. And the secret to my success is I volunteer for everything. I probably volunteer for too much. But in policing, I try to understand the reasons why we did things in policing. I think empathy And building empathy gave me a leg up in understanding crime victims and doing everything I could to help crime victims and to see it from their perspective. The same with offenders. Sometimes it's a long ride back in a police car with somebody you've got in the back seat or somebody that you're sitting with at a hospital waiting for treatment or waiting for entry into a psych emergency ward. You have those opportunities and the public doesn't see it. When we have those opportunities to talk with the offender, they know they're never off the record. The Miranda says, what you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I think I took those opportunities with crime victims and crime offenders to try to understand what was behind whatever happened. And I know that, today we hear about things in the media and we often do not consider the perspective of the victims. And I wish we would take a look more at what's happening with them. And for instance, we've seen these smash and grabs where stores are looted, but we don't really think about the shopper who was there, maybe an older person or someone with a child or someone working behind a counter, and the trauma that they experience in these kinds of things that are often overlooked in news stories. I think empathy plays a big part in safety when you're thinking about the safety of others.
Especially in the beginning of your story, it really looks like the search for protection was such a driver in your life that it kind of kept you going from one step to another. You wanted to feel safe as a young person. You wanted to be protective of your family. You wanted to even seeking work for money's sake. Money is an extremely overlooked element of feeling safe and protected that we often don't think about when we think about what poverty does for people. One of the elements is you don't feel safe because money brings you so much safety.
Right.
For you, it seems like it's really led you on this great journey where now you have enough sense of safety and protection within your own self that you sought out a career where you could be protective for other people. And as you talked about victims, for example, but for a lot of people, that search for protection and safety is never enough. It can be a source of tremendous anxiety to always be trying to feel safer. So my question for you is, how do you know that you're safe? How do you personally feel like, okay, I've reached this point and my home is safe, my bank account's safe, my work is safe, my relationships are safe? Or do you ever feel that way? Or do you feel like you're always trying to solidify that more?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And safety is relative, and we all have our own versions of safety. I consider myself so fortunate sitting here talking with you today. And I know that I have students that are living in cars or they're couch surfing or they're writing their papers on their cell phones or they can't get Wi-Fi. I know there's really severe differences in safety. And for me, as comfortable as I am when we talk about resiliency, when I think back to my own fears and my thoughts growing up, that I built the resiliency from struggling as that child. I think sometimes we do a disservice to our own children when we try to do everything for them. And we may be seeing that with a generation, not to paint everybody with a broad brush. So often there are these memes and characterizations of a generation of people who've really had it good. I think we need to struggle a little bit at times in our life to be more resilient and know how to come back from a difficult situation. For me, I could hit the lottery tomorrow and still be thrifty and be
Okay.
a smart shopper and do the things that I do that harken back to my early days. Will I ever feel like I can leave the doors open to my house and walk without looking around? I think there's a sense where we may feel safe, but there's also the need to have a situational awareness where we need to be aware of our surroundings. We need to be aware of what's happening in the world. And I think we always need to keep our guard up to some extent. I know I do. I try to talk to my students about situational awareness. And it means knowing where you're at, who you're with, how are you getting home, What time of the day or night is it? What are you doing that might expose you as a victim? And so I always ask students, when you're out and about, be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what you're doing, be aware of what you look like to others. And it's in my DNA. Being safe is in my DNA, so I can't get away from it.
You mentioned that you spent a lot of time talking to people that you've arrested, to perpetrators, but you also understand victims and what they're going through in terms of trauma. Is there some element of trauma that's almost always behind the person going out and doing what they did?
Yeah, there's so many crime theories out there, and chasing the American dream is one of them where, again, you can't feel like you have enough. And so you're envious of other people's status or property, and you want to attain it, but you don't know how. So you might resort to crime. I think, though, for the violent crime that I've seen, it's more about people who don't know how to interact with others, that the skills they learned growing up may be that their conflict resolution is punching the person who disagrees with them. Again, so much of you in adulthood is based on what you've learned growing up. For people in unfortunate situations growing up, they need to look outside towards mentors or role models and seek advice. I think it's great to have people like you who look to build skills and communication. And I think so many people wouldn't be in the crime scene if they had those tools to help them navigate. And we talk about things like the school to prison pipeline, where maybe in education we don't do so well in reaching kids at a younger age. By the fourth grade, if you don't have the necessary skills to keep continuing forward, then that's a real turning point in when kids start skipping school or dropping out or hanging with people that are up to no good or resorting to gang affiliations or drugs to either gain an identity with a group or to escape from it. I think drugs, it really bothers me that we're in a situation now where we want to legitimize or normalize or decriminalize drugs to the point where we're at this ever increasing all-time high of drug overdose deaths. And policing is not the answer to the drug problems. I think public health has a big part in it, but I think it points to a larger problem in America where accidental overdoses happen, but also suicides are high too. And I think it's something that we need to solve, not only in America, but across the world. Yeah.
Let's just talk for a moment about trauma, because I think that you're in a really unique place. The police are at the pinpoint of where life and trauma meet, and you meet people oftentimes at the worst days of their life. And so can you describe how you look at trauma as a human being and as a police officer, how you see trauma and how you think about how do you help someone when they're right there at that moment in a terrible situation?
Yeah. For the officer in uniform on the street responding to those calls where someone is hurt or someone is in crisis or somebody's been victimized by another, usually somebody that they know, usually somebody that they love. We know we are not going to solve the problem in the 20 minutes or hour or 2 hours that we're going to deal with this person. We've moved to some great training for police officers with victim-informed interviewing skills, where we do try to show empathy towards the victim, to be very careful in interviewing, in retrieving evidence, in the words that we use, in realizing sometimes that we're going to have to delay an investigation because we need to get this person safe. And we may need to get them into the back of an ambulance and be separated while they're being treated, or whether they're undergoing an exam or counseling by someone. We've really moved on since I started in policing in 1980 to where we are now, where we've got really sophisticated cops out there doing a really good job of taking care with crime victims and then adding the resources. So, in a city like San Francisco, where we've got great resources and we have a law called Marcy's Law, where officers hand out or give information to crime survivors to let them know what's available for them. It can be from medical treatment, psychological treatment, victim witness services through the district attorney's office, getting them a ride to a medical appointment or a ride to court. Probably 15 years now, we've been including looking after children at the scene of crime. And whether or not they're directly involved, we know that there is an impact and a long standing effect on children who witness violence. So that's in our dashboard. I think police do an awful lot in social services, in mental health, in crisis, but we don't have the answers long term for people in situations that could really use the help and advice of professionals in those other areas.
So you're not really equipped to be a therapist on the spot. As I said before we started recording, I didn't want to get too political because I think there's so much to talk about in
Mhm.
terms of what we need to be doing with policing. And it's another subject. But I want to talk about how, as a human being, meeting another human being. And what I mean by that is police officer to kid who's just done something and you need to chase them down or whatever. There is this clash that I think we see happening over and over again with a person who is running away because they've done something or they haven't done something and they're afraid. So they see a police officer, they see the uniform, and they go into fight or flight. And then they run, and then the police go into fight or flight. And then we have this clash of emotionalism and trauma and triggers, and not enough information or training, I think, to understand how do we calm that down.
We've taken so many different runs at the problem that you're talking about, and we've made inroads and then we've taken steps backwards. And I think it is such a moving target with social media out there, the popular and print and news media. And we focus on these really negative, high profile incidents while forgetting about the thousands of positive interactions that we have with young people. And I grew up in San Francisco in the 60s and 70s when crime violence was really high. And I was less afraid of the police than my peers and other people on the street. So maybe that was what steered me towards them. But I still had friends on the periphery who did exactly what you're talking about, see a police car and run. And they don't know, they couldn't tell you why. I think we have a lot of positive interactions. Maybe we don't publicize them as much as we should. I know we don't. And there's so many positive programs, a lot of energy, a lot of time and money being spent to take kids on outings, to take them shopping for school clothes, Christmas drives, taking kids on backpacking trips and to football games and baseball games. And we have a fishing program and so many other outreach programs. And yet we still have a solid percentage of kids that look at police as not their friends. And we perpetuate it sometimes as adults. I can't tell you how awful it is for a police officer to be walking down the street or having lunch somewhere and they hear a parent or grandma say, "Hey, see the police over there? If you don't eat your whatever, he's going to come get you." Or if you don't obey grandma, they're going to come get you. That's a negative message to that kid. And I would always take that opportunity to go down, kneel down, get on their plane at their level and say, "Your grandma's only joking. She doesn't mean that. Police love kids. If you ever need help, police are going to help you. And 911 is the number that you need to call if you ever need help." And I don't think I can't remember a time when I didn't take the opportunity to do that after one of those kinds of alerts. And I think if we're using the police as a threat to our own kids, that's a horrible message.
Mm.
And if cops don't realize that and they miss the opportunities to make those one-on-one connections, that's the start, right?
Yeah.
That's the opportunity. And we should take more advantage of that.
I agree. But we also need something more systemic because for every story that you have that's like that, there's someone who has a story that's not like that.
Mhm.
And I was talking to one of the folks that works with us who's African American, and I was talking to her about what are your experiences with the police growing up. And she said, I was there when they came to the community activities and I got the stickers and I liked them. But yeah, she said, as I got older, or even as a kid, I was told by adults, do not talk to the police,
Hmm.
only as a last resort. And then she said, as I got older and I started to be exposed to police brutality, it started to fuel a stigma and the feeling that I needed to keep my distance.
Hmm.
And then there's a no snitch, which I do see the other side for, but I
Mhm.
understand why some people don't because they call the police and then tomorrow the police come knocking on their door and now they're in trouble with so and so down the street who's you just told on me and now I'm coming after you. So
Right.
it's a danger either way. But one thing that she said was, or she said after George Floyd, she said she was in an Uber on her way to her cousin's house and a police car came up behind them and followed them and she said, I think they're just happened to be going in the same neighborhood. But she said, I had a bodily response. She said, my heart was beating, my hands got clammy. I felt like in my body, like I was in danger, even though I knew intellectually that I'm just going to my cousin's house and we haven't done anything wrong. And I think that's the problem is that we have these automatic responses and those individual interactions can help with that, but that's not going to change the entire system that we have operating. So we continue to have these, and one moment that doesn't go well reverberates across the society. How do we find a balance where we can leave the community feeling safe and protected and we're understanding our own triggers as people in the community and for the police understanding, hey, just your presence is triggering someone and how do you now respond in a way that's going to keep you safe, keep the community safe, and do what your job is to do.
I totally understand what you're saying about the snitches end up in stitches or in ditches or whatever
Mm-hmm.
the phrase is. But it really hurts to hear community leaders say something like that. And police have to be more nuanced in their follow up. And just like you say, if you come to the door the next day or that night in response to something happening in your neighborhood,
Or you get a subpoena.
yeah, oh, awful.
Almost sent this article to you that came out the other day, and I'm sure you've seen it, where the mother and father were police officers, and they both committed suicide and left a baby behind.
Mm.
Just really tragic situation, and I think part of what I would like to see is less of a stigma among police officers to recognize the need for resolving trauma for themselves and getting mental health support and not thinking of it as weakness. And that's one of the things we try to do at Bounce Back Generation is say this is not weak to understand that you need these supports in your life. It is strength because once you understand how your brain works and your body works and what happens when something terrible happens, you have to have a response to it. That's what makes you strong. That's what makes you resilient is that knowing I need to take a break. I need to go talk to somebody. I need help.
Yeah, I looked at your website. I looked at the 6 building blocks: protection, relationship, coping skills, can-do attitude, belonging, and storytelling. And I think it all funnels into being able to protect yourself, to have resiliency, to have people you can rely on, people that you can talk to. And, I've tried to understand the big issues with suicide. And I know there's so many organizations out there that want to smash the stigma. I've had some people on my podcast, Dr. David Black from a company called Cortico. They have an app where if you're feeling despondent or really troubled or in crisis, you can reach somebody on an app. And I think that's one way that we can get people to reach out. Maybe when they don't feel, maybe they feel ashamed or they just can't bear talking to somebody about whatever the problem is that they're having. And the person's really going through a lot of trauma and a lot of pain to resort to something like suicide. Yeah, we're again like the drug overdose situation, the opiate overdose situation. Suicides are climbing and climbing, and they are a major killer of law enforcement officers too. And in regards to that child left behind, I understand another police couple adopted the child already.
Oh.
We have peer support groups, but again, maybe cops aren't so willing to talk to somebody they know or somebody at their station or somebody at their department. Yeah, I don't know what it is that we could do to get people to reach out. I've had situations where friends thought they were on a really good plane and then all of a sudden it happened. And I looked inward to try to understand what they were going through or what could I have done to reach out. And sometimes it's just out of the blue. People put on a happy face, and hopefully science can get us involved in finding out what the tipping points are or what the early indicators are when somebody really needs intervention, because the numbers are just way too high.
I think the expectation that police are so tough and so special that they, in terms of being able to manage stress, that they should get up and get back right out to work after a major shootout, or not even a physical trauma, but seeing something like you show up at a house and someone has been murdered and the kids are left behind, and or you've been able to take a child out of a home who's been abused. Those are things that have lasting emotional impacts. And also, kind of psychic, spiritual impacts. You wonder, what the hell, what kind of world do we live in? And those should be natural responses to those experiences, and being able to take time off and being able to work through it, tell the story about what happened, having people listen and understand. And that's how you create empathy that can be really deep and lasting. And I just wish there was more of that kind of attitude, that there's a strength in doing that, instead of you're supposed to get back to work. Why do you need time off? Go to have a drink. Right?
No, I mean that you show some really good insight there, because people obviously don't look to the police officer perspective after a shooting or after an officer involved shooting. But that aside, what you just said about officers witnessing trauma or a crisis. And I don't know what the numbers are exactly. They talk about, in terms of anywhere from 8 to 12 incidents that a person might see over their lifetime of real crisis or real critical incident, viewing a homicide or viewing somebody after a horrific car crash. I mean, cops see that all the time. And I don't think the human brain is built to witness and endure so much trauma. So I think you've got a point there, that there's this buildup of repetitive trauma involvement, and whether it's witnessing it or being a participant in what's happening. And I've had some pretty horrific encounters over my 32-year career, and man, I can recall them vividly. And sometimes I feel like I'm back on the spot. If I'm talking to my wife about a situation that happened to me 20 years ago, it's real and you feel it. It's a chemical response in your body. It's a chemical response in your brain. And I don't know how long it takes to go away, if it ever does go away.
It's how we're built. It's what makes us human beings. There's no shame in that. And if there's one thing that we can do with Bounce Back Generation, is to show people that that response you had is what you're supposed to have. It's how our brains are built. It's what makes us human. I always say that we're on an evolutionary journey. And I think the next step in our evolution is that we take this incredible research that has been developed over the past 10 or 20 years that says this is how your brain works while it's traumatized. It's going to have effects on you. This is just the science of it. Don't take it personally. It's okay to need what you need. And that is what makes us human. The fact that we need to recover from trauma is what makes us need relationships with each other. It makes us creative. It makes us curious. It makes us delve deeply into our spirits and our psyche, into what does it mean to be alive. And it's the thing that's going to separate us from all the robots are going to be out doing everything, in the end. So, Jim, who made a difference for you when you were growing up?
I talked about it briefly, but growing up in the Mission in San Francisco, I had my bike stolen when I was about 10. And I told my mom, and she said, "We'll call the police." I said, "Okay." And I went up and dialed the 7-digit number. And I saw the police pulling up outside of my house. And I said to my mom, "Hey, they're here." And she said, "Well, go talk to them." I'm 10 years old. And I'm thinking, holy Toledo. So I go out front and I talk to this cop. And I was maybe 10 or 11. And I thought he's going to discount me, get in his car, drive off. "Where's your mom? I'm not talking to you." Instead, he was great. And he had a sense of humor about him, but he didn't talk down to me. And he didn't get my bike back. I don't even know if he made a report or not, but the interaction I had lasted me to this day.
Thanks for listening. Our producer is Liam Donaldson. Music by Jogging Turtle. Please subscribe to this podcast. It really helps us to grow. If you like the topics we discuss and would like to support our nonprofit, please visit bouncebackgeneration.org to learn more about us, and please consider donating to help us along.